of programming for students related to stress relief. I do mental health first aid certification. So it's really just trying to make sure that the college environment is one that is trying to decrease stigma and really trying to promote the mental health of all of the students and honestly the faculty and staff of the college as well.
Thanks, Stephanie and Wendy. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Emily Rosado, and I teach English here at Montgomery College. This is my 12th year as a full-time faculty, and I'm also certified in mental health first aid, which Stephanie just mentioned. It's a wonderful training program that's offered in countries all over the world. And I also serve on the board of directors of a local nonprofit called EveryMind, and they offer counseling services and a whole range of services to promote mental wellness. Thank you so much for joining us.
So Emily, I'll
okay.
away on the introduction.
Okay. All right. Yes, thank you. So our objectives for today are to identify the term mental health disorder and learn about signs of a potential problem. Also to recognize signs in an online setting because, of course, that can be more challenging. And then to develop increased awareness of resources for students with mental health concerns. So, as workers in higher education, we're all aware of the emphasis that our institutions place on student success. And rightly so. Of course, we work in this profession because we want to help students learn and to reach their goals, and success can look like different things. So traditionally, things like passing classes and gaining skills and knowledge, being able to transfer those skills to different disciplines and into the workplace are all things that denote student success. But I wanted to pose a question to you all. We also want our students to be resilient. And this is something that's been gaining a lot of buzz lately, student resilience. So what does that mean to you? What does it mean for you? What does it mean to you for a student to show resilience? You can go ahead and type up your comments in the chat box if you can see that there on your screen. And we'll wait a few seconds to see what your thoughts and opinions are. Resilient, being able to handle the daily stressors of life. Yes, thank you, Nancy. Anyone else? So students who do show resilience are more likely to be able to handle those stressors, just like Nancy said, and less likely to, fall into, a depression or to develop, some of these mental health issues that we're going to talk about. So it's just something that I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through the rest of the slides.
So I wanted to really start off things by talking about what is a mental health disorder. I think it's really important that we are all on the same page and we all know what we're talking about when we talk about mental health. The definition that I really love is NAMI's definition, and NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, for anyone who's not familiar. Their website is a fantastic resource, but it's important to note that mental health and mental illness is something that impacts a person's thinking, their feeling, and their mood, and it really does impact their ability to function on a daily basis, their relationships. So their ability to pay attention and concentrate in classes, their ability to then remember what they're learning and to pass tests or write coherent papers. When somebody's dealing with a mental health issue, then these things can be really negatively impacted. And the key is really this decreased ability to function in work, school, and personal relationships. And it's important also to remember that mental health disorders are also treatable. About 90% of people with mental health disorders do go on to achieve recovery. So this is not something that, we stamp, depression on the person, and that's just who they are every day, all day for the rest of their life. In talking about what a mental health disorder is, I think it's also important to note what a mental health disorder isn't, because sometimes once we start learning about things like mental health disorders, we become overly aware of them. If anyone's ever bought their first car and then all of a sudden you see that car everywhere, for me it was my Kia Forte. I never even knew what a Kia Forte was before I bought one, but then all of a sudden I'm seeing them everywhere. And I would like to think I'm just super cool and everyone wanted to buy a Kia Forte because I bought a Kia Forte, but obviously that's not the case. What happens is I'm more of aware of it, so I'm going to see it more often. So we really need to be careful not to over pathologize, because everybody is going to feel a range of emotions at some point in their lives. If anyone's ever had a breakup before, they suck, you feel sad, you might not want to get out of your PJs, you might want to sit in front of the TV or be with your friends, cry a little bit. Getting anxious over an exam is important, actually, because you're not going to study if you're not feeling a little anxiety about it. So we really need to remember that these are things that we should expect to see from students from time to time. But once that kind of crosses that line into actually stopping them from either being able to take the exam or turn in their papers, to even get to school, to be in those classes or to participate in an online classroom, that's when we might start looking at, okay, this has gone beyond something that would be typical of a person in this particular situation, and we might be dealing with a mental health problem. We also have to think about things that are developmentally appropriate. Hopefully, too many of us don't have 5-year-olds in our college classes, but I guess you never know. But the attention span of a 5-year-old is short. Asking them to sit still for 8 hours is just not going to work. So saying a 5-year-old has ADHD just because we're putting requirements on them that aren't really realistic isn't fair either. So we also have to be keeping these developmentally appropriate things in mind as well when we're thinking about what is and what isn't a mental health disorder. Talking about recognizing, this is kind of the most first step. If we don't know how to recognize what a mental health disorder is, then we certainly can't help our students. So some of the things that we want to look for are kind of too much or too little of certain things. If a student all of a sudden starts putting on or losing an excessive amount of weight in a short period of time. Sleeping, if they're sitting in your classroom and they're passing out and sleeping through half the class, every single class. Or if they're talking to you and they're saying like, oh yeah, I sleep like 2 hours a night. Things that deviate from what we might expect to see. Students who are pulling away from their friends, their family, they're dropping activities that they used to really enjoy and not replacing them with other activities. So again, talking about developmentally appropriate, it's normal for students coming out of high school to start having different interests, having more adult interests perhaps. But if a student was a star basketball player, they really loved it, and then all of a sudden drops basketball and doesn't pick up anything else and just is using that time to isolate, again, that might be one of the things that could signal that this is a mental health disorder as opposed to something that would be developmentally appropriate. Again, students who have low or no energy, feeling numb, like nothing matters. A big one that we tend to see, especially for students who might not kind of know about mental health disorders, is this unexplained aches and pains. They do what's called somaticizing. So if a person doesn't necessarily have the words to talk about how they're feeling or to kind of explain what's going on with them, sometimes the emotional pain turns into physical pain. So it might be stomach aches, headaches, digestive troubles, muscle aches, things along those lines. If a student ever talks about feeling helpless or hopeless, hopelessness is actually the number one sign we need to look for suicide prevention, actually. So if a student's saying that they don't see that anything is ever going to change, nothing's ever going to get better, and things don't matter anymore, that's something we really need to be paying attention to and asking that student about. Using drugs more than normal, being confused, forgetful, on edge, angry. And if you look at some of these, emotions, they might look like something else, right? So if a student's forgetful, it's really easy sometimes to attribute it to, well, they don't care. That, you know, they have quote unquote more important things going on in their lives, so they don't care about school, they don't care about my class. Um, you know, they're not on top of their stuff. They, you know, but we have to think about, is that really what's going on, or maybe is there something else going on underneath? Some of the things you might see is, you know, a student who was very close with somebody else in your class, and now all of a sudden they don't speak anymore. You notice they're not sitting together, or they're not participating in projects together anymore. Mood swings. Anybody who's having persistent thoughts and memories that they can't get out of their head. If somebody's dealt with a traumatic event, maybe a serious car accident, or something along those lines, and they keep having kind of these memories of that, or nightmares. Anybody who's hearing voices or believing things that aren't true. And anytime anybody talks about harming themselves or somebody else, we need to be taking them 100% seriously. Doesn't matter if we think that they're manipulating, we need to address this. If a student's saying that they are having suicidal thoughts, if they're injuring themselves in some way, or they're threatening somebody else. But again, that inability to perform daily tasks like taking care of children, getting to work or school, that's what the thing that we really need to see. We want to see patterns and clusters of behavior. Any one of these symptoms on their own is not necessarily an indicator of a mental health disorder. So having unexplained aches and pains, that could be something completely different if that's the only symptom that's going on. That could be, I don't know, I pulled a muscle and didn't realize I pulled a muscle, or something along those lines. But when we see 2 or 3 of those things happening, if we see a student that's sleeping in class all the time, is always kind of complaining about muscle aches, and they don't seem like they have a lot of energy, then we might say, okay, this is more than just one thing going on. Also, significant changes from typical behavior. So someone who maybe was really always up and engaged, really participating in online discussions or in the classroom, and all of a sudden they're not participating anymore. Or it can also be the reverse, somebody who was never participating and all of a sudden seems very up all of a sudden and very communicative. That can also, believe it or not, be a sign that something is going on.
Okay, so if we think about our online students, oftentimes we don't ever see them. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to be in tune with them, but there are some things that we can watch for. So on the screen you'll see, you know, absence. Maybe a student hasn't logged into the class and it's the second week of school, and you know, it's easy to assume, well, oh, they just want to drop the class. I'll just kind of let them do that on their own time, but maybe it's something else. I think it's important to reach out to students and to try to check in with them and just let them know that we're thinking about them and that they're a valued member of our classes. Late work and change in pattern of participation, you know, Stephanie just mentioned this. In the online classroom, this is pretty easy to see, right? Because you're looking at those assignments coming in and you see that like blank, you know, slash where there's no work coming in from a particular student. If the student's work is consistently late, maybe there's some kind of challenge going on, and that's just not, you know, poor time management. There might be some difficulty that they are enduring at home or in the workplace. Changes in pattern. If you have a really diligent student who usually does all their work on time and participates, and then all of a sudden they kind of drop off, that might be another time to check in with them. Just tell them that, you know, I've noticed that you're not participating as much. I just want to know if you're doing okay, if there's anything I can help you with. Hypervigilant students, I see this a lot in classes. This is the student, and I'm sure some of you can relate, this is a student who's emailing you like every 5 seconds, like, I have a question. Did you get my email? Did you get my email? Did you get my email? Right? It's like they're so anxious, and you know, and it's hard for us, right? Because we want to help them, but we have many students. But that's definitely a sign to watch for. And for me, I try to have a conversation with those students and say, hey, I really think that one of my goals for you this semester is to be more resourceful and to have confidence in your work. And I think just having those conversations can go a really long way in putting a student's mind at ease. And then, of course, every now and then you may get a student who's posting something that's maybe somewhat inappropriate. That's another flag. And I think, when I was probably a brand new teacher years ago, I had a student who was posting some things that I didn't find appropriate. And, as a new instructor, my instinct was to email the student and scold him and, be like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you doing this? This is not appropriate. But, of course, now I think I would handle it differently and just have a different approach and just ask the student if, what's going on with them, how are they doing, are they finding some of these assignments challenging, and maybe explain to them that it's really important to me to have an atmosphere in my classes where all students feel respected, so, maybe you should rethink that assignment, or, if you'd like to do it again, I can help you revise it and give you some pointers. So, just kind of extending that invitation to have a conversation, I think can go a long way. Next slide, Stephanie. Okay, so how can instructors help? So one of the things that I like to do is to make sure that the students know that my online classroom is a safe space. So how do we do that? One of the things that I started doing a few semesters ago is to include a strength and diversity statement. This is something that I can send to all of you later if you're interested. But it's just a statement on my syllabus that states that every single student is a valued member of my class, regardless of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status. I include a whole litany of all the possible differences that I could think of, just to make sure my students know that this is really important to me and that we're all valued and that I really care about everything that they have to say. Including a short bio. I'm sure many of you do this in your Blackboard sites or whatever LMS that you use. Just presenting yourself as approachable, telling a little bit about your hobbies or your likes, I think really helps the student to remember that you are a person, a real person, and not just someone who's like a faceless entity sitting behind the screen who's grading their work. Sending a welcome email before class starts and on the first day of class, I think can really be helpful as well. Usually 7 to 10 days before a class starts, I will send a welcome email to the class telling them that I'm really excited and looking forward to working with them, and I send them any text info that they need, and just to remind them to check in to that class and to log in, and that class is starting, and that they need to read through the orientation information. Highlighting resources on campus. So this is important, especially for students who aren't familiar with our campuses, because maybe all of their classes are online. So giving them information about the DSS office, our counselors. We have food pantries on campus. I try to emphasize to students that we do have lots of resources that they can take advantage of if they're local. Mobile markets, we have food trucks come once a month and offer food to, like fresh produce and bread and other items to any student, staff, employee, member of the community. I try to normalize this as much as possible so that if the student is in need, that they don't feel embarrassed or ashamed to take advantage of those resources. And I also invite students to on-campus events. So I think, it might be hard for students to feel connected if they're online, and inviting them to events on campus like movie screenings or workshops, panel discussions, I think, that can really help them to feel included. Last semester we had a great panel discussion about how to help students who suffer from anxiety and depression. And it was for faculty and staff, but I invited students to come. And a bunch of my students did attend, and they just really appreciated They felt valued knowing that there was a workshop specifically focused on helping those students who do suffer from anxiety and depression, and a lot of them made the point that, you know, their instructors are the ones that they see, you know, every week, twice a week, or 3 days a week. So, you know, they're more likely to reach out to their instructors. So that puts us in a unique position. We're kind of like in the front lines here, and you know, any kind of help that we can offer, I think, is just really beneficial in helping our students to be successful.
All right. So actually that provides a wonderful segue, because as Emily said, oftentimes the instructors become the person that students feel most comfortable talking to, whether they're a new student or even returning students. Sometimes we have so many resources at our colleges that, you know, half the time I think faculty and staff don't even know everything that's out there. So it's really difficult for students to remember those things all the time. So what they do know that they have, or who they do know that they have, is their instructor. So you may be the one that is reached out to, you may get a paper or an assignment that shares some of this information. I know at the community colleges, we all have our behavioral intervention teams, and depending on how yours works, what's appropriate to share with them and everything. But it's really important, regardless of what referrals we make, that we also are able to listen to and talk to our students. So when we're responding to the student who may be having an issue, it's really important to remain calm and non-confrontational. Even if some of the behaviors they're displaying might be slightly more agitated, it's really important that we maintain ourselves and that we're not escalating the situation further by yelling or blaming the student, telling them this is what you are or aren't doing. We're using I statements. It's really important to maintain ourselves. So we're not yelling, all those types of things. We need to make sure we're kind of being aware of our all of our cues, our verbal and nonverbal cues. It's also important to appear confident. Mental health conversations can be challenging, and we're not asking anyone to be anybody's therapist unless that is your job in real life. But what it is important to be is at least look confident and like you know what you're doing, that you can provide a referral source, because if a student doesn't think you're going to be able to handle it, they're not going to share this with you. Listening non-judgmentally is one of the most important things that we can do, because if you think back to any problem you've ever had in your whole life, probably the best thing anybody could have done for you in that situation is just to be quiet and listen, not to try to fix the problem. I always use my mom as an example. She's terrible. She's a fixer. It's where I get it from. So I call her and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going on. And she's like, okay, well, have you done this, this, and this? And I just want to like throw the phone and be like, can't you just listen to me for 2 minutes? So, you know, just being able to listen to what that student has going on is one of those really key things. And to stay positive and strengths-based. You know, we talk about when we're approaching a student saying, hey, these are some of the things that I've noticed, it can get kind of negative quickly. So we want to start out with, hey, these are all the reasons that you've been a really awesome student, but I've noticed some of these changes recently. Are you okay? And we also want to empathize. Empathy is different from sympathy. It's not saying, I'm so sorry you feel this way. It's letting the student know that you understand what they're saying. We're paraphrasing what the student says back to us. We're clarifying. It also doesn't mean that we condone their behavior. Sometimes they're doing things that aren't good, can be self-destructive, especially if it involves drugs or alcohol. But what we can do is say, you know, I understand why you're doing this, even without saying, oh yeah, it's totally okay that you're doing this. Giving a student options is really important as well. Oftentimes when people are having mental health disorders, they can feel really out of control. So if all of a sudden we start making decisions and saying, okay, we're calling X, Y, and Z people, the student can feel even more out of control. So if the option is, hey, at MC, we have our counseling and advising center. saying, hey, do you want to call counseling and advising and have somebody come, see if we can have somebody come here, or do you want me to walk you to counseling and advising? It's a small choice. We're comfortable with both of these choices, but it gives that student some agency in that moment. And also letting a student know what you're going to do before you do it, as long as it's safe. If we call public safety and the student doesn't know about it, and the student's relatively calm, and all of a sudden 6 officers show up, you're probably going to escalate the situation. So as long as it's safe, make sure the student is in on the plan. If a student's a threat, make sure we're not leaving them alone. If we need to step away for whatever reason, try to get somebody else to step in that situation. If we're having an email conversation, making sure the student has hotline numbers, or we may even end up having to call in a welfare check on the student. Sarcasm, not good. If a student is experiencing delusions or is just having negative feelings or thoughts, it's not our job to talk them out of it. Just like we're not saying, yeah, oh yeah, definitely negative thoughts, those are awesome. It's not our job to be like, oh wow, yeah, it sounds like, the police really are following you. That's not our job. We just want to empathically respond in those situations. I mentioned not blaming, criticizing, judging students. We also don't want to minimize difficult situations. Just because it's something that we would be able to handle, or even if 90% of your class was able to handle whatever the particular thing is, it doesn't mean that this student is able to. So making sure we're taking each person as an individual and recognizing that this might be really tough for them. If the student wants to pace around, some people are more pacing around as long as it's safe. That's okay. Some of us are huggers. We like touching. We have to recognize that not everybody is a toucher or a hugger. So making sure we're avoiding those types of triggers unless the student says it's okay. Promising confidentiality. Oftentimes you'll hear someone say, well, I'll tell you what's going on, but you have to promise you're not going to tell anybody else. But reality of the situation is we may have to tell somebody else. We're all mandated reporters. So what I like to say, feel free to write this down and use it yourself, is that, listen, I'm not going to tell anybody who doesn't need to know, but if we need to get you help to keep you safe, then I might have to tell somebody here on campus. And word that however you would like, but letting the student know that that might be the outcome, but you're not going to go spreading their business. You're not going to say in your next class session, oh, hey, Jane Doe is having a, bipolar crisis, so she's not going to be joining us for class today. And also, number one, don't put yourself in danger. Nobody needs to be a hero. If there is a weapon involved or something like that, do not try to tackle anybody. Don't, maintain your own safety. If a student is really agitated and just wants to get out of the office, even if they are a threat to themselves, do not put yourself between the student and their exit, because they're probably going to go right through you, and we don't want ourselves hurt, because then there's 2 things that we need to be worrying about. So yeah.
Okay, so here are some things that, oh, sorry, okay, I just heard a sound, sorry. Okay, so compassionate standards. Here are some things that we can do in our online classrooms that I think can be really helpful. The first is to practice compassion by being firm but flexible. So I think if from the very beginning of the course we can let our students know by kind of like our words and our interactions with them that we value them, they're much more likely to open up to us when they are having a difficult time. So when a student does approach you and their kids are sick and in the hospital, or their elderly parent had a surgery and they had to look after them, I think offering them some leeway and being flexible but also like being firm can be really helpful to helping that student to succeed. Also, I'm sure many of you use principles of universal design in your classrooms. UD principles can benefit all students. Things such as clear and easy course navigation, clearly labeled deadlines, offering students some degree of choice with certain assignments. I know that can be tricky, but if there are one or two assignments in which the instructor can be a little bit flexible, for example, for this assignment you can choose to work with a partner or you can do it alone. I have an assignment like that in my classes. Being choice kind of gives that student agency and helps them to be more motivated. Making sure that those due dates and deadlines are clear, but perhaps you can offer one freebie for late work. So I usually offer that to my students. The first time they submit something late, they're not going to get a penalty, but they know that in the future, if it happens again, then they will lose some points, because we do have to be mindful of our deadlines. Offering multiple attempts for the first graded assignment is something that I recently started doing. And again, it just goes a long way to alleviate some of that anxiety. So I have a syllabus quiz, for example, and it's, it seems, at least to me, pretty easy, right? You just read the syllabus, but some students weren't doing well on it and they were getting failing grades. So now I just open it up and they're allowed multiple attempts, unlimited attempts actually, so that they can take it again, they can take it a second or a third time if they need to, because of course the point is that they learn the material and actually know what the class policies are. I'm not, trying to get them or fail them. So, so that's just one thing that I do that I think helps to alleviate some of that pressure. Next slide, please. So some practical tips that you can implement in your classrooms right now that I think, in my experience, have been really helpful include some low-stakes introductory assignments that are graded. So, in an online classroom, building community is really important in helping students feel comfortable and helping them to open up. So, introductory assignments where students are required to maybe share a little bit about themselves, I think is really helpful, and it helps the students to get to know each other, helps to build community. It also gives me a lot of insight into who they are. Oftentimes in those first assignments, students disclose all kinds of things, all kinds of tragic things, and it just helps us to all realize that we're in this together, and everyone goes through like really difficult moments in their life, but they're all here in the class and they're all doing the assignment, so that's a win. And grading those assignments, having everyone start off with a good grade, I think is so important. I can actually personally attest to this because I'm a brand new doctoral student this semester, and it's nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking being in the classroom again, and getting that perfect score on the first discussion board assignment was so helpful to me into convincing myself that I can do this, even though I've been out of school for so many years. So moving on, the diversity statement on the syllabus I think is key. I've had students in my face-to-face classes respond and say that they really appreciate that. Opening up the lines of communication. I don't know how many of you use a texting service like Remind, but I use that in all of my classes, face-to-face and online, and it just offers a way for students to reach you and to ask you a quick question, or if something's going on with them, they can just quickly let you know through text. Of course, we have guidelines for when they can text me and when they shouldn't text me, but my students have found it really helpful just to be able to get a hold of me in that way. I had already mentioned offering a late work freebie, and then posting the number to the crisis text line or the suicide hotline is something that I do every semester. I tell my students to put that number in their phone, because you never know when you might need it. You never know when you have a friend who needs it. There's no shame in reaching out and getting help. And there is, there is also a text line. So if a student doesn't feel comfortable making that call on the phone, they can just use their cell phones and text the crisis line and talk to somebody 24/7. So those are things that I like to let my students know about.
And kind of piggyback onto what you were saying, Emily, I think something else that, these are great ways to start the semester, but kind of mid-semester, around midterms, just a little reminder hey, this can be a stressful time in the semester, for here at Montgomery, hey, there are some events going on, Mindful Mondays, they give your brain a break activity. It's okay to feel stressed out, and don't forget that this is where the resources can be found. So that can also be something that's helpful in the second half of the semester.
And if I could just interrupt you for 1 second, because there's been a couple of comments in the Zoom group chat, and I know there's one way back that I'm going to get to when we get to the very end, but there's a side conversation going on about another resource called Aunt Bertha that Al Aldridge has, might be messing up the name, has posted. And I don't know if you had heard of that or not, but they said you can put in the zip code and find local resources, which auntbertha.com, which if you're if you're looking at the chat, if anybody on the call or on the Zoom is looking at the chat, they put in the website.
Neat, thanks.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I had not heard of that, so thank you. Okay, so continuing on, Stephanie had mentioned some of the things that she oversees on campus, like every Monday we have Mindful Mondays. We have brain break sessions where students can kind of like come and just decompress and have a space to just like take a deep breath. So I try to invite students to those events just to let them know that they're around, especially like she just said, around midterm time when everyone gets really stressed out. I try to do like little things to help students stay organized, like, I email them like these calendar templates, and I'm always reminding them to like block periods of time in your day throughout your week to work on your homework for this class. Some of them might not have a calendar. I mean, I think most people have phones, but maybe they're not used to using their calendars, or some students like to write on physical calendars. Maybe they can't buy one, so I just send them these templates to use. Checking in with students who haven't turned in work, of course, is something that that we should do just to see if there's any way we can be of assistance to them. I personally like to engage on the discussion boards. I think that it helps them to feel like, hey, she's actually really reading our posts, because I have had students say, like, do you really read like what we write? Like, do you really? I'm like, yes, I do. So I try to get in there at least once per assignment and just respond to somebody, or maybe ask an additional question, just to keep a presence in the course site. And lastly, I hold online office hours. So once a week, there are a couple hours devoted to just my online students, where they know that they can either chat with me or just email me and know that they'll get a response right away because I'm sitting at my computer, and I just have that time dedicated for being able to help them. Next.
Okay, so those are some really great practical things that you can do in an online or even a physical classroom setting. But it's also really important to know, when we have a student, where do we refer them to? Again, we're not their counselors, we're not their therapists, that's not our role. So we need to know where we can send people. One of the really important things we can do is help them engage their support system. So do they have a friend that they talk to about these things? Do they have family members they feel comfortable talking to? Who are those people in their life that can just sit and listen? We can also engage and encourage professional help. Are they already seeing a therapist? Does your college or university have a counseling center that can refer them to an outside therapist or psychiatrist, help manage any medications? Stigma is still a big issue, unfortunately, and for some people, they do not feel comfortable going to see a therapist. So in many instances, a spiritual leader might be somebody that they are comfortable talking to. So encouraging that connection as well. Emily mentioned the hotlines, having the students put them directly into their phone. So it's not like, oh my gosh, where was that, where was that card, or where was that syllabus that someone told me about? It's already in there, they know where it is. And the crisis text line, all of us millennials and Gen Zers who don't like to actually talk to people on the phone. And it's also important to know your campus resources. Again, if your campus has a behavior intervention team, if there's some concerning stuff that they need to be aware of, if you have a counseling and advising office, again, ours does not do clinical work, but they can help support students if they're having some issues with things like time management or stress or coping skills, and they can also then refer them out. Disability support services, mental health disorders, if somebody's diagnosed, that is included under ADA. So if a student is eligible, if they had an IEP or a 504 in high school, making sure that they're connecting in with DSS. Are there mentoring programs on your campus? Student life, are there clubs? What are some ways that we can get them engaged, help handle some of loneliness is something our students oftentimes experience. Students who are first generation might just not know where to start. Do you have support groups on your campus? There are so many different things, but it's really important to familiarize yourself, go on your campus's website, bookmark all those important pages, and making sure that if a student is asking for, hey, where can I go? We're not just telling them, oh, Google depression or Google suicide. There's some really negative things out there. So we want to keep them away from those things, and we want to have websites that we can send them directly to, places like NAMI or your campus counseling and advising. At Montgomery, we have a community resources section on our Student Health and Wellness Center page. So if a student maybe is like, oh, I don't want to go through another step going to counseling and advising, they can go directly onto this page and they can see some of the therapists that are available in the community. And if there's any life-threatening crisis, call 911 or campus safety, campus security, whatever your campus's policy is on that. We don't want to waste time if there's a potential opioid overdose, if there is a suicidal crisis, if a student, comes in and says, hey, I just took an entire bottle of pills, that's not the time to sit down and let's have a whole conversation about it before we take action. We need to take action right away. And then while we're waiting for emergency services to arrive, we can kind of let the student know that we're there, and we can, be supportive in that way. But we don't want anyone hurt. So make sure that we're able to judge what is a crisis, what is an emergency, and what is the method on our campus for getting help immediately. So that is our info. If anyone's interested, for community colleges, there's not a ton of data out there, but there is a really great study that was done and released in 2016 about community college students and mental health. The information from the Wisconsin Hope Lab is up there. And again, NAMI's website, nami.org. So I think we've got some time for questions, right, Wendy?
Yes, we do. This is, you timed it right to the 10:45 mark, which is awesome. I do want to get back to the very first question that was asked in the chat, which was also from the same person who was having the, while they were having the conversation, and asked the question about resources, and Aldridge posted something else. But Megan, I think, posted earlier about, in the very beginning, you talked about resilience, and she expressed, I should probably just read it, that it was a little bit of a worry because, as she wrote, it implies that some students can work through their issues and others can't. This implication being that those can are worthy of success. And so I was wondering how you kind of balance that idea, knowing that resilience may not necessarily equal successful, but I do see where students might feel like they have to do that, have to kind of buckle down and get through something when they actually may need help.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I just sometimes get concerned when we hear the word grit. To me, it sort of is reminiscent of referring to someone as like a cancer survivor, sort of the implication that if you didn't survive, you did something wrong. And so I'm just always really sort of wary of talking to students about that, because to me, sometimes it can imply like if you can't work through your stuff on your own, then you're not worthy of being successful.
So when we talk about resilience, we're not talking about grit. We're not talking about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. When we talk about resilience, we're kind of looking at like a rubber band metaphor, where when a student falls, when they fail at something, resilience is their ability to bounce back from that. So it's their ability to fail and then get back up. So again, being able to get back up includes getting supports from different places, being able to talk through some of those things. So we're not at all saying that, you know, students should be able to get through this by just buckling down. Again, we're talking about resilience in a whole separate concept from that.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, based on what you've done and the way you talk about it, I think that's very evident that, you know, that you're doing all the right things. It's just, you know, I'm an English professor, and students sometimes think they know what we mean when we use certain words, and it might not be what we mean. And so I'm positive that you all sort of explain what that means to you. I'm just concerned about the faculty who are probably not on this webinar, who sort of just use that word without sort of explaining what it really means.
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with your concern, and I think what I tell my students is that it's something that you can learn, and it's something that you can develop like a muscle. The more you kind of practice and use it, like the more resilient you can become. And I went to this really interesting conference on resilience in higher education about a year ago. And one of the things that came out of that was that the students who are the most resilient are the ones who have meaningful relationships with their faculty. Mm-hmm. So that's something that has always stayed with me. It's the students that, it's the faculty who, you know, who put themselves out there and, like, you know, make that effort to develop those relationships with the students. Those are the ones who are able to help the most. I just thought it was so interesting how important that was to a student's success. It wasn't something that I had really heard before. Even though it makes sense when you hear it, you know, to see, like, the studies of it, like, you know, it just kind of stuck with me. So, yeah, I think, and that's why, you know, going back to, like, the diversity statement and just, like, being really approachable, I think it just goes a long way in helping students to kind of develop that resilience.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, sort of laying that groundwork at the beginning of the semester when they might not necessarily need it, then they feel they have a relationship with you when they do. And it might even be semesters later. I mean, I've definitely had students come back, you know, and just, you know, and because I'm, you know, I'm a soft place to land, basically.
I think that's great. I mean, they're so lucky to have you.
I mean, it really validates what I do because, you know, as an English professor, you can look at their writing and not really feel like you're doing anything. So when they come back and you can help them in their lives, it definitely validates what we do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Please type in questions if you have more. I have one other one. I don't see any new ones, but go ahead. This one is this one actually came up in a separate conversation from this webinar from someone else who expressed, hearing all the resources and everything that are out there and the things that you should do kind of reinforces this. But this person was saying, I wasn't trained to recognize this stuff. This wasn't what I bought into when I started teaching online, or actually this was in the classroom, but teaching and trying to recognize, it's got to be even more difficult on an online classroom, but face to face, you know, how it's just, I think kind of seen by some as a burden to try to be not just, you know, the instructor and doing everything else that you're doing for this classroom, but now you have to kind of be an assessor of mental health for all of your students. How do you get people on board? How do you get faculty on board to understand? I mean,
oh,
yeah.
I say we're working on that.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are some faculty that will unfortunately probably never get on board, and it's something that I hear when I run trainings all the time, that, you know, like, well, we're not their therapist, but the reality of the situation is, you know, people with mental health disorders are here. About 50% of community college students have some sort of diagnosable mental health disorder. You know, I guess if you want to think about it in the most self-serving way, you know, if students continue to fail your classes and you get bad reviews, you're not going to have a job anymore. So it would behoove you to pay attention to some of these things so you can keep your job. But I mean,
right to the stick, from the carrot to the stick.
yeah, right.
But
I mean, again, I would hope that most people, you know, we can talk to them, we can help them understand, you know, the importance of this, you know, the fact that the suicide rate has gone up 33% since 1999, you know, and it's not that necessarily people have more mental health disorders, but people are more comfortable talking about their mental health disorders. We're trying to get rid of that stigma, you know, and you know, it's not just our students, it's, you know, faculty members, it's staff members as well. You know, nobody is immune to this stuff, and God forbid it's like somebody who's in your family. This is important information. Sorry, this is my rant.
Well, I get it. Like,
Emily might have, as a faculty member, she might have some insight.
well, I mean, I totally understand where that person is coming from, because it's hard. It's hard to, you know, be the content expert and also, you know, be in charge of like your students' well-being. I mean, not that we're in charge of it, but I think we're going to see more and more of this as we see the rates of depression and anxiety among teenagers is just rising at an astounding rate, as Stephanie referenced. And I think, you know, I think colleges should provide more support for their faculty, because it is draining. It's hard to hear these stories of students who were assaulted, or students whose parents were deported, or students who, you know, are working the night shift and then they come to class and they're falling asleep. And, you know, it's not easy to take on all of that. But at the end of the day, I think we're teachers because we want to help people. And if we can provide some resources or be, you know, a soft place to land, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Oh,
like someone had just said, you know, like, I mean, that's, in my mind,
Megan.
I mean, that's
yeah, I was
Megan.
muted.
Okay, Megan, like
muted.
you said, yeah, that's part of our job, right? But yeah, Stephanie and I we're trying to, like, you know, get faculty and staff to just be more aware and to just, you know, let everyone know how important it is. And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, all institutions are really like focused on student success. So like this is just one way that we can support them to help our students.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember that like some of the other things that we're working on for student success when it comes to food insecurities, housing insecurity, you know, all this other, you know, just generally students who don't have insurance, if all of these things are weighing on them, these are additional stressors that can either make underlying mental health issues, you know, come out. And if we can relieve some of these other stuff, we can help with some of the mental health stuff as well. So it's all interconnected, all of these different student success efforts that, you know, all the colleges and universities are really putting forth. So, you know, it's just all part of the same thing.
that's really good. I mean, that's you know, yeah. I mean, it is definitely a struggle. Are there any other questions? I want to thank our speakers. This was excellent. Emily, Stephanie, thank you so much. This was a wealth of information.
Thanks for having us.
I'm just very, very happy. This is like I said, this is a topic we've been wanting to present on for a long time, and you guys have been really, really good. Again, I will be sending out the link, and our speakers have been very generous with sharing their slides, so you will be receiving all that not momentarily. I should say it takes a little while to get the link up and everything. Thank you again, and if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can send them to Kathleen, myself. We'll get them to the speaker. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.